All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is a Trellis Group webinar today, sponsored by SE Advisory Services. And our topic is how compliance and voluntary carbon markets are reshaped. I already said the wrong title. How policy and compliance are reshaping the voluntary carbon market. I'm your moderator today. I'm Margaret Morales, and I direct the Carbon Capital Lab. So I'm going to be guiding us through our conversation today. I'm going to split the conversation into basically three parts. The first will be the implications of carbon market convergence, what this means for buyers. Then we'll talk about how buyers are responding to quality frameworks. And finally, how buyers are balancing quality, risk, and budget. I'm going to leave a good chunk of time at the end of our hour today for audience questions. So you can submit those throughout our conversation. You should see, I think there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So you can click on that and submit a question anytime. And I'll do my best to get to as many as we can throughout the conversation. So I'm really delighted for this topic today. And that's because this convergence of voluntary and compliance markets is growing. And it's something I think people throw this term around a lot. Oh, the convergence. And often don't know sort of like what it means or where we're seeing that. So I think about a quarter of carbon credits that are retired every year are done to meet a compliance obligation. And that would be either a carbon tax or an emission trading scheme. And so we're going to talk about what are those retirements and what does this growing trend mean if you're a carbon credit buyer. So we have a wonderful panel with us today of experts who are seeing this dynamic develop and unfold and how they are each kind of seeing the impacts on buyers. So we have William Tyson, who's the Commercial Director of Nature-Based Solutions at SE Advisory Services. SE Advisory Services was previously EcoAct with Schneider Electric. And so they recently rebranded, and now you'll know them through a new name. We have Erin Lottie Durham, who is the Director of the Global Sustainability Team at Jacobs, and also Patrick Pellegrino Day, who's also at Jacobs, and he's a carbon and sustainability consultant. And finally, I'm delighted we have Michaela Waldman, who is with the ICVCM. That's one of those big acronyms in this space, the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market. And she's a senior manager of market engagement. So thank you all so much for joining us today. Before I start grilling you with questions, we're going to start with a poll for the audience to kind of get a sense of who's joining us today. So here's the poll. Okay, fair warning, there are a lot of answers. So I'll read out the poll question and the audience can skim through all the answers to find what applies to them. The question is, which of these roles below best represents your role in carbon markets? Oh, and this is actually multiple choice, so you can select several. The choices are, project developer, project owner, you're from a carbon crediting program, trader, platform provider. There's so many different actors in this space and pieces of the ecosystem. So let us know what your perspective is. And that'll also help our speakers today sort of speak to who's on our call with us. All right, looks like we're getting a good percentage of responses. So yeah, let's go ahead and show the responses. Okay, thank you to everybody who responded. Okay, so let's see, about a third of folks joining us today are corporate buyers of carbon credits. We have quite a few project developers with us. Looks like 26% of folks calling in. And then a really nice sprinkling across the whole ecosystem. Folks from insurance and legal services, rating agencies, data providers. So this is a really fun group with a lot of different experience. And so I expect everybody to submit great questions based on your experience in the market. So with that, I want to move us into our conversation with the panelists. And I want to kick it off with kind of the big picture question of the topic for today, which is how are we seeing this convergence of voluntary and compliance markets, and what does it mean for buyers? And William, if you don't mind, I'd like to start with you and kind of what have you seen in this space as you watch the market?
No, it's a great question. And thank you so much for organizing this webinar today. Really excited about this conversation because it's really pivotal to anybody who's engaging in the voluntary carbon market. I've been in the space since 2010, and over the last few years, it's really felt more consequential changes within the voluntary carbon market and as of other times. And we've really entered into a phase where market maturity and regulatory interoperability is kind of working together. And this moment is for companies to move kind of towards, as opposed to kind of experimenting into the voluntary carbon market, to more intentional engagement. And with this, we've actually seen even the voluntary carbon market rise. We've seen retirements increase year on year from about 10%, seems to be, but we're kind of due for further increase because of the compliance markets kind of looking at the voluntary market and kind of saying what should the voluntary market kind of contribute to their compliance schemes. So as opposed to before, where it was more kind of Kyoto Protocol, the clean development mechanism, and then the voluntary carbon market kind of running in parallel, this is really one where it's a lot of experimentation and then compliance taking what it wants. And I think we're seeing that a lot with like CORSIA, which is the carbon offset reduction scheme for international aviation, which is supposed to increase demand by two or threefold after the first phase. And so companies really are now acting more intentionally, looking how they can kind of build inventories, relationships within the carbon market at today's prices, because the other part of the equation is that even though maybe some of these regulatory frameworks are going to be only taking a subset of the voluntary carbon market, demand has a lot of work to catch up. It takes a long time for voluntary carbon projects to build up, actually issue credits. And overall, we're, like we have COP30 coming up, COP29 really kind of with Article 6 paved the way, and now we're seeing that go into operation. And then over 37 jurisdictions looking to implement new regulatory carbon markets inspired by the voluntary carbon market. So from Singapore to Brazil, from the UK to France and in the EU, it's really becoming kind of two markets that are kind of inspiring each other. But it's getting more efficient, and the claims that are coming out are becoming more precise. We're still waiting on some, and we'll dive in a little bit later into that discussion. But especially with the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market, that really has kind of been the oversight that has really level set the market in terms of like opening it up to compliance markets. So yeah, we're set for growth, and everybody's kind of watching how these carbon markets are really going to affect the demand and make sure that companies can enter in this market feeling comfortable and confident with what they're purchasing.
All right, thank you. Patrick, I want to go to you next because you have this really interesting role where you're supporting Jacob's internal climate roadmap and climate commitments, and also you support clients, external facing clients. So I'm curious, how often is this topic of convergence between carbon markets coming up, and how do you see any of the folks you work with kind of trying to adapt or anticipate it?
Sorry. We, to my knowledge, we're actually not dealing with compliance market issues in our own corporate work. Maybe Aaron can correct me if I'm wrong there. And it's in our advisory work, we're focused on the voluntary carbon market or removals outside of the voluntary carbon market, actually, when clients are looking for carbon removals for their own goals and purposes, but actually don't want to do so within the realm of the VCM at all. But Aaron, I don't know if you have anything to add there in terms of the compliance market.
I do think compliance market just complicates the market as a whole, because we're constantly looking for that additionality, right? And if they're doing these projects to meet compliance requirements, that takes away the additionality. So we've got to have a good understanding. Is this project being done to be in compliance, or is it being done outside of that? We want to be investing in the ones outside of that. For example, right now we're looking at renewable gas certificates, and some of them are being subsidized by certain areas and some aren't. And there's definitely a price difference, but the importance of understanding which credits you're buying and what those credits reflect, I think is it's going to become trickier, and the compliance market might actually drive some of the voluntary prices up.
William, are you seeing some of that impact on price in the voluntary market?
We're definitely seeing some impact on price, especially, and we'll dive into the ICVCM. I mean, traditionally, we looked as a founding member of the International Carbon Reduction Offset Alliance, another fun acronym that is now referred to as ACROA, as kind of the way of best practice, right? Like you have to work with international standards, you have to go through the process of how you're managing all the credits on the registry. But now with the addition of the ICVCM, right, there is a tendency to look at kind of aligning where compliance markets are going. And ICVCM, I believe, is really setting the stage for that. So that means looking at the methodologies that have been approved by ICVCM, what that kind of brings more confidence, even though there's still more to be assessed. But then you have all the other frameworks where they're more focused maybe on removals, and maybe those are more on tech-based removals, or maybe they're more on nature-based removals, and they're not focused so much on avoidance. We're seeing prices for those kind of removal credits go up quite significantly because everybody's kind of coalescing around this demand. I do want to highlight that the avoidance projects, there are a lot of really amazing projects within that realm, right? Like, and so just because there is this kind of coalescing around removals doesn't mean that there's not great things happening in the avoidance space. But there just seems to be more kind of like attraction towards that, just because they feel companies feel that that's where the market is going, and that's where they kind of feel more comfortable.
Okay, thank you. Michaela, let's talk about the ICVCM. Can you tell us, kind of walk us through what the ICVCM does with CCP labels and how those are being adopted in the market?
Yes, thanks so much for having me. So just to back up a little bit, the Integrity Council is an independent global governance body that sets a quality threshold for carbon credits through our core carbon principles, our CCPs, and the assessment framework. So the way that we do this is we assess based against the CCPs, both these carbon crediting standards and then the methodologies that they're using to that project developers will use to then create projects. So the CCP label assures buyers that each credit represents a real verifiable ton of emissions that's either been reduced or removed based on the latest science. And we do this with our core carbon principles that embed things like transparency and tracking, third-party verification, avoidance of double counting, so that it can really improve trust from both like the buy side and for investors to have confidence in CCP credits that they purchase or invest in. And kind of to go back to the question that you asked earlier in terms of converging of markets with the compliance markets, as you mentioned quite rightfully in your opening, the line between voluntary and compliance is blurring increasingly. We have, a couple different schemes that including that William mentioned, like CORSIA or the Article 6 mechanisms under the UNFCCC, or different domestic ETS schemes, and they're all beginning to have kind of this interoperability where voluntary credits that we have typically thought of as being for the voluntary market actually could become eligible to be used in these different compliance systems. So governments are looking at ways to whitelist high integrity credits such as the CCPs. So there are examples where CCP credits will be able to be used in compliance systems, and that will drive up demand for these high integrity credits and help us maintain that quality threshold across all different markets. And we're seeing lots of examples of that from different countries, both in their ETS systems and in the way that they're doing kind of international transfers as well.
Thank you. I'm curious how you think companies should think of CCP labels. Do you think of it as like a minimum threshold of quality or a gold standard?
So the CCPs are like a quality threshold for credits. We assess them based across, our entire assessment framework and make sure that they will deliver 1 ton of verifiable CO2 either reduced or removed from the atmosphere. And companies or users can have confidence in that. And then there are lots of other ways, once they have that confidence in that quality threshold, to be able to look at more specific attributes of the projects. And, rating agencies are one example of that. Different types of other providers can also provide more in-depth understanding of specific projects, but we look at the methodologies and the programs to deliver that quality threshold for credits in the market.
Okay, great.
Yeah, if I could just add something to that. I mean, it's been really interesting to see the ICVCM come into this space because I think it overall creates like confidence within the methodologies and it kind of that oversight of that minimum threshold. Because at SE Advisory, we always used what we called the eco score to complete a lot of due diligence on a per project basis. So in order to really open up the door to compliance, right, we need this kind of level set, right? Like what are the latest methodologies? What are the most quality? It's not to say that projects that are using maybe old non-ICVCM approved CCP approved methodologies are not quality, but there's just, you have to look at them at a per project basis and really kind of dive into like the details. So we always do that on behalf of our buyers and any of our clients that we work with to make sure that they're kind of getting the best of the best. But I think it is a really important for as a kind of holistically to kind of move over into like this overall confidence into the market in itself with kind of approved at the methodology level. So you don't so the market doesn't need to necessarily look at all the projects as detailed as they did prior.
Okay, thank you. Erin, I'm curious for you as a buyer, what other, Michaela mentioned CCP labels are one piece of understanding quality in a carbon project, but what other tools or frameworks do you use as you're evaluating a carbon credit for purchase?
I'm going to let Patrick answer that because he did it for me this year and he's doing it for clients. So I'm going to kick that over to you, Patrick.
Sure. Yeah. So we do look at CCP and CCP approved methodologies. We also have our own questionnaire, pretty thorough questionnaire that we ask vendors to complete. And that's looking at different accounting methods and co-benefits. And some of that is driven by sustainability disclosure requirements, actually, like CDP, what kind of information they're looking for around offsets, because getting that information from the vendors in the selection and post-selection process allows us to have be audit ready as we are preparing offsets for those types of disclosures. And then in our advisory work, it is driven by what the client is looking for. Well, yeah, I'll also say that for some projects and some types of companies that might be approaching us about offset projects, we'll also go to our own bench of subject matter experts. We're a large engineering company, so we were approached by an enhanced rock weathering company, and then we turned to our own engineers and subject matter experts there for due diligence. And then, yeah, in the client realm, various examples. We worked with a large energy company that was looking for nature-based offsets in Southeast Asia, and then we leverage our local staff on the ground combined with our own kind of ecosystem carbon analytical tools that we develop in-house. So it depends a lot on the context of the project, and it's a mix of all those types of resources.
I mean, and that's really actually, I mean, what Patrick described is really what we're seeing on a kind of wide scale of this, like, okay, ICVCM is kind of an indicator, but there's also kind of like with the historical or current like alignment with the overall operations, the strategy, or the various stakeholders like your value chain or maybe clients, et cetera. And we're seeing that kind of across the board of this. Yeah, they're understanding ICVCM, but they're not necessarily holistically just that's their decision factor. It's ICVCM and then looking at other factors in terms of evaluating the projects that they're selecting, but they definitely want it. They're doing it more intentional than I've ever seen it before of how they're choosing those projects to make sure that they're aligned with the various stakeholders that they're working with, and or SDG alignment. They're not just kind of just taking whatever is available on the market.
Yeah, I will say we also do some digging into reputational risk. We actually we'll Google a project to see did it have any red flags. We'll go into all the documentation of the verification of the project and look at the details of how robust is this, what's the potential for I'm losing permanence. What's the permanence and what's the backdrop if, for example, a forest that we invested in catches on fire? What are the, understanding, because people are looking at this, they're really scrutinizing it. We're public facing, they're going to look at our details. I get the strangest, most detailed questions at times, even from our board, just making sure we've done full due diligence on everything.
All right, thank you. Super interesting. It's super interesting, William, to hear you say, like, as you've been in this space so long, that you see buyers becoming more intentional. That's a really interesting observation. So I want to continue with you, William. Here's a question. Are there ways that companies right now can align their offsetting claims or their carbon purchasing strategy that sort of avoids legal or reputational risk as these rules are evolving?
So, I mean, again, a lot of these different regulations are evolving or kind of being put in place now. Like we're all waiting on pins and needles for COP30 to see like how the Paris Agreement crediting mechanism is going to be put in place. Maybe it will open up to voluntary carbon credits. And how the different like kind of countries or regions are going to kind of implement their own compliance schemes. But like, I mean, even with the EU, they're looking at including, I believe, around 3% of its 2040 target to be open to carbon credits. But how that will kind of form, everybody, I'm sure it will have something to do with ICVCM. Will it be all of the equation? We don't know. And then there's also the kind of letters of approval and to make sure that there's no double counting that's happening for nationally determined contributions, which is a whole nother step that project developers are kind of learning to navigate. But I think that for when we're advising companies, we're looking to reduce risk, and it's really just do that, use the most robust kind of methodologies out there, look at the international recognized standards. Where ICVCM has approved methodologies, absolutely, that can be a really good indicator. Where there's still assessment and kind of opening, we really want to make sure that we're doing that deep dive assessment, and frequently we are going on the ground to do field audits to make sure that these credits are robust and coming from a project that is doing what it's saying it's doing. So I also think working with a partner on this, whether it's through Jacobs, whether it's through SE Advisory, I think to have people on the ground who know and have followed the carbon market to kind of, but always be curious about the project. Don't hesitate about asking millions of questions, because as Aaron said, you're going to get those people who are buying the credits may get questions from their board, and they need to be ready. So we are always wanting to be as thorough as we can with any project that we're engaged with, so we can empower our clients to kind of respond to those questions, whether they be internal or external.
Okay, you brought up COP30 next month,
Ah,
Article 6.
yes.
Somebody in the audience asked a question in the Q&A box. I'm going to throw it in here because it's relevant. So they said, it seems like nature-based credits could be on shaky ground regarding Article 6.4. And I think what they mean is it might be very difficult for a nature-based credit to count under Article 6.4. So any reflections about how you're thinking about the future of nature-based solutions in relation to this convergence we're talking about?
Michaela, you may have thoughts on this, but I'll just jump in. Nature-based solutions are definitely, I mean, again, I do love the voluntary carbon market, and there are a lot of really great projects in there. So they're, just because they may not be compliant, it doesn't mean that they're not doing some really important, great work. But nature-based solutions, I think, are here to stay, especially the removal. So I mean, those are actions that people understand, the larger stakeholder group really can kind of get their head around, and we're doing the reduction like today. Whereas like tech-based removals are more, we're seeing companies move into the space because they want to be the catalyst for the innovations of the future, right? Like, so carbon capture and storage, biochar, those carbon credits are quite expensive these days when we're talking about the more widespread carbon credits that are available to corporates. But I think if you see like a lot of tech companies moving into the space because they really want to be the catalyst so that this can be a solution for the future. So I don't think that nature-based solutions are at risk. I think it's just more looking at making sure that the methodologies are robust, that everybody can kind of get behind them, and then what type of nature-based solutions are going to be accepted within these regulatory frameworks. But I don't know if Michaela, you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I can jump in. At the ICVCM, the way we do our assessment, we're project type agnostic. So we look across all different project types to make sure that the methodologies that are being used are in accordance with the CCPs, and make sure that they're high integrity. We have a CCP on permanence, which is kind of that main factor in terms of differentiating between the durability of different types of credits and different types of projects. And we're confident within our standard that the permanence CCP ensures proper durability of a credit. And we have past methodologies that will create nature-based projects. That being said, the market and just technology in general is evolving very, very quickly. And permanence is a concept that is evolving with the market, and the ICVCM is staying abreast as to this type of progress. And we establish, alongside our assessment framework, when we published that, we published 10 continuous improvement work programs, and these each tackle specific topics in the market that are evolving quickly, and we wanted to bring experts together to give us recommendations as to how we can improve that standard as these things progress. And our first one of the first that we kicked off was actually on permanence. The final report was published a few months ago, but if you look at the report, you can kind of see we had experts from all across the market come together and give the ICVCM recommendations as to how to update the current standard to make sure that the systems in place to ensure permanence within nature-based credits, but within all credits, is robust, and then also kind of systems level solutions and redesigns that could continue to progress this permanence. Things like the integration of insurance, permanence funds, and other types of kind of more innovative approaches to addressing permanence, and making sure that regardless of the project type, the permanence and the additional integrity concerns are at that quality threshold to be very high integrity for use in the voluntary market and compliance grade. And in terms of Article 6, we'll see where that comes out. And we are working hard to make sure that we can be in as much alignment as possible, and that we can continue to provide an ecosystem where credits can be used in multiple use cases.
Right, thank you. Erin, I want to turn to you. I have a question for you about how you think about budget when you're purchasing credits and how you think about that and trying to find extremely high quality credits.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. I'm not going to say it's not a challenge. Every year our budgets seem to shrink. I will say at Jacobs, one thing that we did a while back to kind of ensure we'd always have budget is one, we made a public commitment that we would be carbon neutral for scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 business travel. So we know we have a volume that we have to buy every year. That volume goes down as we reduce our emissions, thankfully. But we put in the internal price of carbon. So for us, business travel is our biggest problem as a consulting firm. We're traveling to see clients for various reasons. So our internal price of carbon is on all our non-billable business travel, all the overhead travel. And that is securing the funds for our budget for carbon reduction initiatives and carbon offsets. But then there's still only so much money. And so we take a look at that and we try to balance, we try to do a mix of less expensive projects with more expensive projects. We're trying to be intentional about which projects we're purchasing. Like last year, we started purchasing carbon capture in concrete. We're an engineering firm. All of our clients are using concrete. We want to encourage that market because we do think there's a lot of potential and we want our clients to be comfortable using low carbon concrete. So we didn't buy a lot of it because it's extremely expensive. We're talking $100 a ton versus 10. So we're weighing that out. And with every project, we're also looking at, we know nature-based is incredibly important. We're doing TCFD and TNFD work right now, and the overlap is incredible. So we don't want to abandon nature-based regardless of what happens with compliance markets. That is the future. If you look at my background, this is one of the first nature-based projects we bought back in 2010 up in Alaska. It's always been important to us to value the ecosystem, and it's going to continue to be regardless. But again, we're looking for high quality there. So it's definitely a balancing act. We're looking at SAF. SAF is incredibly expensive, but we do a lot of business travel. We feel like we need to be investing in SAF to accelerate that. It's also becoming more important that they are removals and not just avoidance. So yeah, I will say we have interesting discussions about how much of this do we buy versus how much of that and what can we really afford. And sometimes I push it up and I'm like, I need more money. They're like, well, okay, what's the business value? And then I go back to what's the business value? And they go, okay, you can have a little more money. So I don't know. It's a battle.
Yeah, but I think this is, I think this is a really great case study, right? Like, because this is not like, I'm seeing like from the consultant side that this kind of tendency emerging faster than I thought it would. It's especially kind of dabbling into tech-based removals. Like, having the appetite for $100 per credit. I would never have dreamed of that back in 2015. But I think it's also really smart, right? Like because it's a way to, as if these compliance markets take off in the way that everybody's kind of projecting, it's a way for companies to kind of get comfortable with the mechanism, to understand it and make smart choices at today's prices, which, again, going back, if these compliance markets, even Corsia after phase 1, it will take a while for everybody to comply with ICVCM methodologies. The supply takes a while to catch up to. It's not like you snap your fingers and you have all these new projects developing with the latest methodologies. That takes a while. So I think the companies who are engaging today are going to be at an advantage once these compliance markets continue to open up, because they'll know it, they'll make smarter choices, and they won't feel as lost when they're kind of trying to balance their budget with the decisions that they are making on which types of projects to support.
William, you've mentioned a couple times like these projects don't develop overnight, they take time. So does that mean, do you see a supply crunch for at least
I do.
a period of time?
Yeah, I think there is going to be a supply crunch. I mean, we're gearing up for the first phase of Corsia, right? Like if that continues to go through, right? Like as everybody's expecting, that's going to be over 200 million tons that is going to be, transacted through that, through the requirements that are ICVCM and also the additional requirements that they have to be adjusted. They have to have the letter of approvals. They have to be adjusted, and to make sure that there's not going to be double counting, right? Like there's just so quick you can move on that, and we're paving the way, and project developers are trying to move as fast as possible. But this is a new world, right? Like with a lot of for integrity, I think we'll catch up very quickly, but for there is going to be a time period for these specific types of projects. There will be some crunch on pricing and as well as supply.
Yeah, and I would say for Jacobs, we've been buying market-based offsets for a while now, but we are looking at how do we engage with clients, suppliers, partners to do the development, right? There's a huge demand there. We have a lot of people who are really could do the development, could support the development, and could we support it, so to speak, at cost so that it makes the project more viable? These are definitely things that are big picture things that we're not there yet, but something we are hoping to get to. Before I retire, that's my goal, is that we're going to be out there developing a project. We got about 5 years left, but we'll see.
Yeah. So in 30 seconds, just I mean, this has also been a very surprising development for in the last few years. We've seen companies, because we're also a project developer. So we have projects in Kenya, we have mangrove projects, we have really more focus on nature-based solutions. But we have companies that have engaged on upfront investment for our projects for 5, 10, 15, up to 20 years. Thinking about how companies, multinationals usually work, they can't even engage with suppliers a lot of the time for more than 3 to 5 years, and that they're engaging on these kind of projects for such a long duration, is trying to address that supply question. And there's symbiosis that's out there, that's from the tech companies that are mainly driving this. They're also trying to increase supply, Microsoft in particular, right? I think there is this kind of concerted effort of just like, what is supply going to look like, and how can we kind of make sure that there is enough going forward?
Well, that's actually very interesting also because it shows very long-term thinking in this space.
Right, and you
People
want to
are
be
planning.
compliance aligned too, if you to hedge your bets.
Yeah. Michaela, I want to go back to you. And you talked a little bit about, how companies can be thinking about preparing for Article 6 and where it might overlap with their own strategies. But there are other policies emerging around the world that could influence how companies can even retire credits on a voluntary basis and what kind of claims they can make. I'm thinking about the EU Claims Directive, and even California's voluntary carbon credit, like what you need to disclose if you do retire credits. So I'm curious sort of how you see these global policies influencing companies that are retiring credits, and how they can sort of show their retirements like on a business case, sort of like Aaron mentioned.
Yeah, so I mean, clearly there's lots of different regulatory frameworks, both on the supply side, kind of talking about the integrity side of credits and what would be accepted, and then also on the demand side, talking about things like claims and how companies can best do that. And I think this will really help give clarity for project developers who are developing credits for the space, and also for buyers. At the ICVCM, we are working on engaging governments and different kind of compliance systems to ensure that the CCPs are integrated as the global quality threshold for credits of different types and across different markets, so that both the use case can have clear expectations on the supply and the demand side, and we can ensure that there's real and consistent impact across different markets. One kind of example of this is the Coalition to Grow Carbon Markets between Kenya and Singapore and the UK, which aims to publish principles that are going to be potentially aligned with the CCPs by COP30. And then the work that those countries are all doing kind of individually, Singapore with their carbon tax and having that aligned with CCPs, or the UK's voluntary carbon market principles, which also have been proposed to be aligned with CCPs. So there's lots of good indications that, coming top down, there's a lot of interest that can help companies have clarity in terms of what high quality and high supply looks like, and then how to talk about those claims when they're making them.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you. Yeah,
that's also been, I think, a nice on the client side, on the like how they're making those claims, right? Like it's been a little bit of an area where it's been very challenging for companies to navigate, right? Like what was carbon neutrality, what was net zero, right? Like what was net positive, what was net negative, like which is better. Like it was really a space where the company, private sectors were kind of defining themselves what their initiative was. Now they're kind of coalescing around, different buyer frameworks such as SBTI. I mean, we're all waiting on pins and needles again for the updated guidance on how to integrate carbon credits within net zero. And I think given the engagement with that, I think that could shift the market in one way or the other. But there are also other frameworks that are coming up. So VCMI, the Voluntary Carbon Market Initiative, that looks at ICVCM and CCP approved and how to kind of demonstrate like how you're integrating carbon credits and progressing on your target. And there's also ISO carbon neutrality, which has been released. So we're waiting on ISO net zero guidance. So there seems to be more kind of choices that are appearing in the market, but also I think that will be helped by this regulatory frameworks, right? Like of what is maybe endorsed by different countries that could be possible to really kind of push it in one direction. But I think that is a really important point. Companies need to be kind of empowered to know how to responsibly claim carbon credits are being used within their kind of net zero strategies. Taking that variable out of the equation and just kind of looking to these guidance, I think could be really helpful. And now there's kind of more options out there.
Okay, thank you. I'm curious also to turn to you, Erin, about how you think about public communication around Jacob's climate roadmap.
Yeah, it's been a challenge. I will say this past year, it's been extremely challenging, given what's going on in the US political framework and what we can and can't say, according to our legal staff. But we do really try to, we have this carbon neutrality that we committed to. The interesting part is we committed under PAS 2060, which expires this year. So the big debate today is, do we continue being carbon neutral? Do we switch to the ISO standard? How do we talk about it? I started changing the language from carbon offsets to beyond value chain mitigation. That's how SBTI talks about it, right? And SBTI is trying to encourage beyond value chain mitigation. Whether or not that makes it into this next draft of net zero, we're not sure yet, but I think it will. And I do think it speaks to, we are actively, as long as you are actively reducing emissions, buying carbon offsets on top of that is just helping to solve the greater problem. It's the companies that aren't doing anything and aren't trying to buy their way out that it's a reputational risk. So again, I talked about the kinds of projects we're investing in are actually tied to our core business strategy, and being able to tie those and make the business case again for why are we investing in this? How does it impact our clients? What does that do with our client relationships? That's the way we're having to speak about it. We're not, I'm going to use a word that nobody wants to hear, but the green hushing is real. So we're just trying to communicate it in a different way so that it doesn't look like, oh, we're just trying to be green, which is fine because it's all true. It's just how you dialogue around it so that you avoid certain sensitivities. And I will say that has been my entire last 6 to 8 months of public reporting with CDP and our annual report is speaking about it in a way that makes sense both to investors on both sides, right? The ones that want to see the green sustainable work moving forward and the ones that claim it doesn't provide value.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really great point. I mean, it's and I think it goes back to the initial of being like intentional, right? Like it's and I know that I think the word that I heard all throughout Climate Week, we refer to it as headwinds that are happening in the market. It's just kind of sure the pendulum has swung in the other direction, but and I don't really like the term greenwashing, and because actually it just everybody's kind of refining how it's integrated, right, and making sure that it's robust. But there are more frameworks to the past 2060 that a lot of companies relied on that. So now, how do they kind of evolve? But making sure that the business case is there, I think is what I was hearing more of during Climate Week NYC than I had ever heard before, as opposed to doing good, even though we're late. We've got to, everything needs to be moving in the right direction. So the more kind of investment into, reducing at the source, absolutely a priority, but also beyond value chain mitigation, I think is good to do, because we just all need to be moving in the right direction as fast as possible.
Yeah, doing both. And I'm going to move us into audience questions, but what you were just speaking about, William, applies very well. It's a great segue into this question. So I'm going to ask you first. Somebody asked, will voluntary carbon market participation eventually become mandatory or be essentially replaced by carbon taxes? And how should we discuss the risks and benefits of participating in the VCM when we're speaking with internal leadership about this?
So I think there's always going to be a voluntary space. I don't think it's going to be 100% compliance. I think it's going to be certain sectors that are going to have to be more compliant. And I think that's evident with the Aaron touched about on it, on aviation, right? Like, I mean, there's just not enough sustainable aviation fuel out there to address the issue of reducing the emissions linked to, fuel usage by airlines. So we have to do something. They can't get to zero. So that's an area that we need to encourage, that there's more investment in SAF, that there's, but also while you're reducing, kind of dictate, how you can support the voluntary carbon market or the carbon markets in general to make sure that mitigation and avoidance is happening on the ground as fast as possible. In terms of voluntary carbon market, and sorry, the second part of your question, could you repeat it one more time?
Yeah, they were asking sort of what are the risks and benefits of participating in the VCM, and how do we express that to internal leadership?
I think it's the risks are just this might not be like a very popular thing to say, but the voluntary carbon market and carbon markets in general just have inherent risk within them, right? Like projects are happening in the developing world, many of them, some are happening in the developed world, or but these are projects that were trying to incentivize innovation and action on the ground, and to get things to scale so they can access more mainstream levels of finance. So in essence, the voluntary carbon market does have some risk in it. And also in some countries, we don't know, there could be political changes. There could be, fires that happen for a project that started in, 2019, but in 2030, there's a fire. So they're just, things can happen, right? Like, and that's a lot of education that we have to do for our clients, that there are things that are just beyond anybody's control, and methodologies can change. But the benefits are really kind of getting engaged now, really understanding how the mechanism works, working with a trusted partner on this if needed, to understand how because this isn't for everybody has kept on saying that since I've gotten into the market that this is going to go away, or it might change or evolve. This is the market that's in place. It needs to continually improve, and it needs to be continually be more robust and have more integrity in it. But I think this is the framework that is going to continue to open up new doors. So learning it now, I think is going to benefit you highly in the coming years.
Thanks. And yeah, your comment about risk, I think, is great, actually. I don't know why, if we're dealing with some of the most complex systems on planet Earth, of course there's risk. It's very complex. So I think that's a great point. All right, Michaela, we're getting some questions about DMRV and whether ICVCM is engaged there or how you engage there. Can you talk a little bit about your work in that space?
Sure, and I think it's quite appropriate following a question about risk, which is that there are, of course, inherent risks with all different types of natural systems and engineered removals and different project types. But what's important is that we have proper mechanisms in place to counter that risk and to manage that risk and to make sure there's liability associated with that risk. That is, why the CCPs exist, one of them being permanence and one of them being this question of like having systems in place, both from a policy perspective, but also a technology perspective that can manage many of these risks. And DMRV is another example of how we do this risk management. This is how we monitor essentially projects over long periods of time. And DMRV is evolving quickly. There's tech continually improving, and the ICVCM, at the time we created the assessment framework, recognized that this technology is going to be improving vastly over the subsequent years. And so DMRV became another one of these continuous improvement work programs that we'll be launching actually very soon to gather market experts and to give us recommendations as to how we can continue to integrate the latest and best and most advanced DMRV into our standard and make sure that the integrity threshold as to how we digitally monitor projects is at the top. So it's something that ICVCM is very much keen on making sure that we continue to integrate into our standard the best quality.
Okay, thanks. Let's see. Earlier, William, you brought up CORSIA, which is the aviation industry's climate roadmap. And so we got a question about that. And it says, what indirect impact could CORSIA have on corporate travel buyers? I don't know if they mean companies purchasing carbon credits for travel. I'm actually not quite sure what they mean. What do you think?
So I think that CORSIA only kind of covers a certain subset of the of aviation and travel, right? Like it's really covering the flights that are going from Paris to New York. It's not the one that's going from New York to Seattle. But I think it is going to be a way to kind of like scale it maybe and get inspired on how that's kind of integrated on the domestic level. That said, there's even initiatives within France, so Label Bas Carbone, I'll say that with my bad French accent, that is looking at, I can't remember the exact article name, but is like for domestic projects within France or within the EU, like trying to integrate those if you're looking to offset emissions for domestic flights within France. So I think that it's just going to continue to engage the aviation industry. Every kind of country is going to have their own kind of mechanism. But on a voluntary basis, I think business travel is going to stay, right? Like it's just is, I mean, like it may reduce, it may change, but how we can incentivize that there's more sustainable aviation fuel kind of being created and produced, but in the meantime, trying to reduce emissions, in the meantime, trying to support these beyond value chain mitigation opportunities, I think it's our contributions. I think it's going to be a really good thing for the aviation industry in the meantime.
Okay, thank you. We've just got a couple minutes left, so I want to ask a question and kind of go around our panel and see what each of you think about this. And my question is, in the next quarter, so very immediate, very actionable and concrete, in the next quarter, what is one thing you would say a company could do to future-proof their carbon credit purchasing strategy? And Patrick, could you start us off?
Sure. Well, at Jacobs, one thing that we are looking at is just revisiting the projects that we currently purchase from under the lens of some of the new quality standards out there, like ICVCM, CCPs, and just making sure that we have the confidence to, like Aaron was saying, to our board or to sustainability disclosure standards, that we feel audit ready for all of those purposes in terms of understanding all of the dimensions of the carbon credits that we're purchasing. So yeah, revisiting things that we've already done with a lens for more quality.
Okay, thanks. Erin, do you have anything to build on that about what you're thinking about in the next quarter?
Not really anything. It goes back to, though, I've got to build the case for this, and I have to have the right tools and information to build that case. Fortunately, I have people like Patrick who I can say, go build the case for me. And he brings back all this great information. Again, where, everybody's very cost conscious, and we're spending money in ways that maybe don't always make sense to corporate people or the board. Our board actually is fully supportive of what we do, but having that information and that story to tell to our internal teams, many of whom are not sustainability people, is I think how we're going to future proof what we're doing.
Okay, thank you. Michaela, what about you? What would you advise a buyer who's thinking about in the next quarter? How do I prepare for all of this?
I'd say in the next quarter, the CCPs will continue to gain traction in the market and establish the unified kind of integrity threshold. And it's really promising that we're already seeing this alignment from various standards and regulatory systems and also from buyers' expectations. In terms of just the impact on the demand, we're already seeing like price premiums of up to 25% for CCP labeled credits. So it's clear that buyers are recognizing the value of the CCPs. And I would say in the next quarter, the CCP labeled credits volume in the market will only continue to grow because more projects will issue credits under CCP methodologies. Existing projects will transition to CCP methodologies, and then also the ICVCM will continue to come out with more assessment decisions. So I would say to buyers, there are over 120 new projects transitioning, and they should continue to look out for these projects as they come online and use that CCP label as a quality indicator for their purchasing decisions.
Do you mean transitioning from a certain methodology to a methodology with a CCP label?
Exactly. There are projects that have been issued credits previously under an existing methodology, and then there's a new methodology for a similar project type that they'll be able to transition their projects to and issue credits so that they can get the CCP label.
Okay, yeah, that's amazing. 120 projects. I hadn't heard that. So thanks for flagging that. Okay, William, what do you think? In the next 3 months, what should a company do to future-proof their carbon credit strategy?
So, I mean, I kind of agree with everything that's already been said. I think in addition, I would say that they should, it's kind of the same advice that I've always had, is be as transparent as possible about your commitment, right? Like, and how it kind of links into your overall strategy. I think where there becomes risk is really when you're trying to solve it, you feel you're kind of communicating that you have it all solved, right? Like it's a journey. Everybody's kind of learning. Everybody's learning about ICVCM. The regulatory markets are forming. People are learning about projects. They're dabbling in there, right? Like, and I think always being as transparent as you possibly can of just like, here's where we are on our journey. We're starting to buy these types of credits because we felt like this is as aligned with our strategy and our sustainability goals. We're currently continuing to evolve this strategy and look at different options in the future and how this can fit into wider, maybe if you're carbon neutral today, maybe a wider net zero strategy, right? Like, so in some sense, my recommendation has always been the same, is be transparent about that this is a journey that everybody's on, and that I don't think anybody can be punished for just kind of being on the learning curve and making the best decision with what you have on the table, or what you understand about the voluntary carbon market today. But get involved, because actually it's not this next 3 months. It's again going over to the more longer term strategy of really understanding the mechanism.
I know we're at time, but there was a question that I wanted to respond to, and it had to do with why should US companies in this climate continue to reduce emissions? I will say, Jacobs, we are a US based company, but we're also a global company. And even if we weren't a global company, many of our clients are global companies. This isn't going away. We're taking a pause in the US, and the rest of the world may surpass what the US is doing and actually may cripple us in some ways. Actively reducing emissions, actively working towards sustainability is where we have to go globally, regardless of the US. And you know, for us, we have clients that we cannot bid on work unless we're actively reducing emissions. We would lose work. So we have to keep moving forward, and unless you live in a bubble where you only work in the US, you're going to have to meet these demands too.
Well, it sounds like a pretty good business case. This is becoming the global standard. William, were you going to jump in?
No, I just couldn't. I mean, I think it's a great way for a final word. I mean, it's just and it goes back to the business case, right? Like we got to refine it, and make sure that it's there, because there is one, and we got to engage now. But I think it was summed up so nicely by Erin.
Yeah. All right. Thank you all so much. This was such a great panel. Thank you all so much for giving your time, and for everybody who tuned in. We appreciate having you here. So I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll see you on a future webinar.